La Bamba doesn't begin with a guitar riff. It begins with a ticking clock. You think you're about to watch a feel-good rock and roll biopic about a smiling 17-year-old who lit up the late 1950s. But from the first frame of La Bamba, there's a shadow trailing every note, every laugh, every moment of promise. This isn't just the story of Ritchie Valens rising from migrant fields to national fame. It's the story of how quickly America can lift someone up and how brutally it can take them away. Behind the music was pressure. Behind the family pride was rivalry. Behind the meteoric success was exhaustion closing in. And behind the making of the film itself were choices so risky they nearly changed its entire heartbeat. Because the real question isn't how Ritchie became a star. The real question is what it cost and who paid the price. 1. The coin flip that turned a kid into a legend. Everything in La Bamba moves toward one quiet, devastating moment, a coin spinning in the air. On the 2nd of February 1959, after a freezing show in Clear Lake, Iowa, Ritchie Valens asked for a seat on a small chartered plane to escape the brutal winter dance party bus ride. The spot wasn't guaranteed. It belonged to guitarist Tommy Allsup. So they flipped a coin. Ritchie called it. Ritchie won. Hours later, the plane carrying Ritchie, Buddy Holly, and J.P. the Big Bopper Richardson crashed, sealing what history would later remember through American Pie as The Day the Music Died. The film recreates this with restraint, but behind the camera, Ritchie's real sister watched the scene unfold, reliving it in real time. The myth looks like fate. The truth feels smaller, colder, and far more human. And that fragile humanity is the thread that runs through everything that follows. 2. The family watched the story bleed back to life. This was never a distant Hollywood reconstruction. Ritchie's family stood on set as their past was rebuilt piece by piece. His mother, Connie Valenzuela, even appears briefly in the early party sequence, a quiet cameo that changes the emotional temperature of the entire film. Lou Diamond Phillips wasn't simply playing a role, he was performing under the gaze of people who had never stopped grieving. Over time, the family began calling him Ritchie, not as a publicity gesture, but as something closer to recognition. That blurring of lines gave the performance an intimacy most biopics never reach. Connie, already ill during production, lived long enough to see the premiere in 1987. She died 3 months later and was buried beside her son. The movie didn't just revisit loss, it ran parallel to it. And that proximity to real grief is why the film never feels sentimental, it feels lived in. 3. The movie almost had the wrong heartbeat. Early drafts of the script didn't revolve around Ritchie at all. They leaned heavily toward Bob Morales, the volatile older brother whose anger and jealousy could fill a room. For a time, Bob was the gravitational center. That would have made for a darker, more combustible film. Then casting changed everything. Lou Diamond Phillips originally pushed to play Bob. Director Luis Valdez saw something different. Vulnerability, softness, the quiet gravity of youth. Phillips was told he wasn't right for the tougher role, and was challenged to find Ritchie's stillness instead. Meanwhile, S.I. Morales stepped into Bob's intensity with fearless force. That shift reframed the story. Instead of orbiting chaos, the film anchored itself in fragile promise. The rivalry became sharper because it surrounded innocence. By choosing the gentler center, the movie gained emotional contrast, and that contrast made the tragedy land harder than any explosion ever could. 4. The music was reborn, not preserved. Most biopics rely on original recordings to authenticate the past. La Bamba did something riskier. Los Lobos re-recorded Ritchie's songs entirely, rebuilding them with modern production while preserving their spirit. The goal wasn't museum-quality nostalgia. It was immediacy. The songs needed to feel like they were happening now, not echoing from 1959. Recording at Sunset Sound, while simultaneously crafting their own album, By the Light of the Moon, Los Lobos poured contemporary energy into classic material. Their version of La Bamba hit #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 Inches 1987, giving a new generation ownership of a song nearly 3 decades old. That crossover success blurred eras. Ritchie's voice wasn't trapped in history, it was revived through another band's breath. The film didn't just tell a story, it restarted a cultural current. 5. It was made on belief, not money. For all its emotional sweep, this was not a lavish production. Lou Diamond Phillips reportedly earned scale about $1,100 a week. He sent a large portion home to support his family. That working-class reality mirrored Ritchie's own sense of responsibility. Behind the scenes, director Taylor Hackford was initially attached, but budget realities shifted the project. Luis Valdez stepped in to direct the film he had written. The limitation turned into protection. Without excess studio interference, Valdez preserved the cultural specificity that gave the story texture: migrant fields, family kitchens, backyard parties, the pulse of Pacoima. Constraint sharpened focus. There's an authenticity to the film's tone that feels unpolished in the best way. It doesn't sparkle like a studio fantasy. It breathes like a memory. Sometimes the lack of money prevents a story from being overproduced, and that restraint becomes its greatest strength. 6. California was reconstructed to feel true. By the 1980s, the real neighborhoods of Ritchie's youth had changed too much to convincingly portray the 1950s, so the production reshaped geography. Fields near San Jose doubled for migrant farmland. Fillmore recreated Pacoima's working-class streets. Apricot orchards near Hollister became labor camps. The Tijuana performance sequence was filmed at the historic Hotel de Anza in Calexico, hugging the border without crossing it. The strategy wasn't about exact addresses. It was about atmosphere. Every location was chosen to evoke texture rather than literal accuracy. This careful reconstruction gives the film a lived-in quality: dust in the air, sunlight filtering through modest homes, dance halls humming with community energy. Viewers rarely question the settings because the emotional truth outweighs cartographic precision. Hollywood didn't chase geography, it chased memory. And that pursuit makes the film feel less like a reenactment and more like a time capsule opened gently, not pried apart. 7. One film launched, 3 very different journeys. La Bamba didn't create a single breakout star. It launched trajectories that unfolded in striking. Lou Diamond Phillips surged forward with Stand and Deliver and Young Guns, proving he could pivot beyond the vulnerability of Ritchie. S.I. Morales built a steady, durable career that would later include commanding roles in projects like Ozark. Rosanna DeSoto continued shaping grounded maternal figures across film and television, adding quiet longevity to her resume. None of them were trapped by this story. Instead, it served as ignition. That's rare for a biopic so closely tied to a single tragic figure. The film gave its actors room to grow rather than chaining them to nostalgia. In doing so, it mirrored the very opportunity Ritchie himself had just begun to taste: momentum that promised evolution, not repetition. 8. The legacy is larger than the tragedy. When La Bamba was released in 1987, it earned around $54 million worldwide on a modest budget. But its deeper impact wasn't financial. It reshaped how Latino contributions to early rock and roll were remembered in American culture. For many viewers over 50, the film reopened a chapter of music history that had faded behind larger legends. It insisted that Ritchie Valens was not a footnote to Buddy Holly. He was a pioneer in his own right. The story reminds us how quickly brilliance can appear and disappear, and how fragile opportunity can be when youth meets pressure. Yet it also offers a quieter lesson. Art can stretch time. A life cut short at 17 continues to echo through vinyl, radio waves, and cinema screens. The coin stopped spinning decades ago. The music never did. La Bamba endures because it understands something many biopics forget. A short life can cast a very long shadow. Ritchie Valens didn't have decades to refine his legend. He had months, a handful of recordings, a tour that moved too fast. And yet his voice still cuts through speakers nearly 70 years later. That is the film's quiet message. Talent opens the door, courage steps through it, but time is never guaranteed. The story reminds us that opportunity can arrive suddenly, and it can vanish just as quickly. What remains is what we build while we have it. Family, music, integrity, memory. For those of us who grew up with early rock and roll humming through the house, this film isn't just nostalgia, it's preservation. It keeps a cultural bridge standing between generations. If this story still moves you, let me know in the comments what moment hit you hardest. Share your memories of hearing La Bamba for the first time. And if you value deep dives into the films that shaped our era, subscribe to the channel. Because the music may fade, but the stories never should.